Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We have with us our distinguished guest from UNDP. So we are going to start our program. So this is basically a series of discussion which Islamic Relief Pakistan is going to initiate under the rubric or banner of development discourses. So this is first of these series, and we are going to start this series of discussion with recitation of Holy Quran. I will be requesting Safdar Bhai to come over here and recite few verses from Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وآية لهم يدا
Jazakallah khair. On behalf of Islamic Relief Pakistan, I warmly welcome Mr. Rizk, resident representative of UNDP Pakistan, Guraya Saab, and Hamza Saab from UNDP, and all participants here. Thank you so much for taking your time to just grace this occasion. In terms of topic which we are going to discuss today, that is insights on climate change, fragility, poverty, nexus, and approaches way forward for civil society. Overall, when it comes to climate change, most of the times which we are discussing at this moment, these are immediate outcomes or immediate manifestation of climate change. These are sometimes flash floods, sometimes droughts, sometimes devastation, which these uh, uh, devastations are leaving in the communities. But what we have experienced over the time, that long-term issues like fragility, and like overall issues like approaches in terms of civil society, that how they are looking at this, or academia how they are looking at these issues, that is missing. And that part of discourse in terms of climate change, that fragility and poverty, how that is being depend, how that is being aggravated by climate change situation, somehow that is under research, under debated. So we have selected this topic as first topic in terms of this series of discussion. So we have with us Mr. Samuel Rizk, resident representative of Islamic from UNDP. So I will be briefly introducing Mr. Samuel Rizk. He has assumed the position of United Nations Development Program resident representative in Islamic Republic of Pakistan from July 2023. Prior to his appointment in Pakistan, Samuel Rizk served as head of conflict prevention, peace building, and Responsive Institutions CPPRI at UNDP Crisis Bureau in New York. He has also served as manager of UNDP RBAS Sub-Regional Response Facility SRF based in Amman, Jordan, supporting the organization's regional response to crisis in Syria from July 2015 to October 2017. Samuel was UNDP country director in Syria, and before that, he served as senior program advisor with Regional Bureau for Arab States in New York. Samuel also served as peace and development advisor in Sudan and conflict prevention advisor in Yemen for UN system. Samuel Rizk holds PhD in conflict analysis and resolution from Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University in 2012, and MA in Middle East Studies from American University of Cairo, and BA in Political Science. So, apart from his practical experience, which he has across different continents, he has right academic background as well to delve upon these topic which we have selected today. So I am handing it over to Samuel Risk. Just I'm sharing with you that at this moment we have these participants, but this is live streamed on different social media channels. And inshallah, we will be having discussion, comments, and follow-up questions after your thoughts. So over to you, Samuel. Yes.
Excuse me, sir.
So would you like to come here or you please
Can please sit here.
Um, maybe maybe I'll start by maybe I will actually stand. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I will actually stand if that's okay. Um, uh, Thank you very much for the very nice introduction. Thank you, Asif, a dear friend and colleague, and in many ways, on a number of occasions, I've often felt that UNDP and Islamic Relief in Pakistan are kind of like sister organizations or twin organizations. I don't know how far back this goes, but certainly because of the flood response, we've been doing quite a bit together. And in fact, my very first mission outside of Islamabad was together with Asif and the team in Sindh and a few districts where we've actually done quite a bit of work together. Really happy with the part of the Holy Quran recitation because it actually speaks a little bit to the topic of where we are on climate change and not only what's happening to us as individuals, but to a great extent what we are doing to climate. I have with me, I can share with you the link, obviously, is the Human Development Report from 2022, uh, entitled a very strange title that we all thought was very interesting. It's mostly about the human development and the role of the Anthropocene. So it sounds like something that comes from the movie Jurassic Park or any of this. But the simple meaning is how we are now at an age, the age of the Anthropocene. We are in an age now where we are the ones that are actually impacting the climate. We are the ones because of emissions or carbon, etc., or consumption or plastic. We are the ones that are actually, to a great extent, impacting the climate. So from the recitation of the Holy Quran, we're talking about harmony between the stars and the sun and the people and the land and all of that. Um, at this point, we are actually to a great extent to blame, and we should look at things that we are doing, not only what happens to us. It's important for Pakistan, no doubt, because Pakistan is among the most vulnerable to climate changes. A lot of the people you talk to now, look at Pakistan not only on the receiving end of floods and droughts and glacial lakes melting and all of these things happening at the same time. But to be fair, they're talking about law, governance, land use, prioritization of particular crops, agriculture, etc. So there is now more of a balanced approach for good or for bad in the relationship between how things impact us, climate change particularly, or how we actually impact climate change. Without any particular intervention on our part, then I'm afraid we shouldn't expect that climate should be kinder to us. I think we need to, for the most part, also be be generous to the climate. I don't know if we want to start maybe with some statistics. I mean, the numbers, to a great extent, people use the numbers for shock value. So let me share a few numbers for shock value. Some related to the global context, and some related, obviously, to here in Pakistan. Everyone is aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, 169 targets. Pakistan is on track for 2030 to meet only 35 of them. Only 35 out of 169. Probably impacted to a great extent by COVID, by the floods, and by many other things, the macroeconomic situation that everyone is aware of, plus obviously living in a pretty tough neighborhood too. Um, Pakistan on the Human Development Index, 161 out of 191 countries, 192 countries. Air quality, Pakistan has a perfect score, 180 out of 180 for air quality. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone at this point. Uh, for OECD list of fragile states, Pakistan is one of the 60 fragile states. Curiously enough, this list of fragile states that comes out every 1 or 2 years um, has now more middle income countries than it has lower development or lower income countries. 35 countries out of the 60 are middle income countries. Pakistan is one of those. Pakistan is one of those because it is a lower middle income country, but to a great extent over the last couple of years, uh, it appears as a middle income country, but the statistics show it closer to a lower income country. And that, I think, is one of the challenges that everybody needs to be aware of. There's another challenge related to that, which is middle income country to a great extent has different kinds of access to loans and funds, etc. So you're still stuck maybe in a place where you don't qualify for a lot of grant type money because you're not a lower income country. You're still in the middle income ranking. But the reality of need is that Pakistan needs quite a bit more. You try to borrow money, you borrow at higher costs because presumably on paper, Pakistan looks good. Um, debt, extreme, $260 billion worth of debt. Everybody knows about the debt crisis, the IMF negotiations, etc. The numbers really aren't that great. Another couple of numbers just for comparison purposes. 2022 impact of the flood. And I think this relates directly to the title of today's discussion, climate change, poverty, and fragility. So the 2022 floods plunged, by our estimates and everybody's estimates, around 10 million more people into poverty. And now, often people discuss the Building Back Better approach as part of the recovery and resilience, etc. But for 10 million people, going back or building back better for them is almost like saying, after 1.5 years of the flood, welcome back to poverty, welcome back to extreme poverty. So the impact of climate change on poverty and on fragility and vulnerability is absolutely clear here in this country. It is about people's lives changing overnight. And it is about at least taking them 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years for access to a house, access to the job that they had, access to income, access to better services So most of this effort that we have collectively together, us and you and everybody else in the UN system and global development partners, really requires much of an acceleration. I saw your tweet from last week about where we are with housing. Great effort, but we're far from rebuilding the 2 million houses that should have been there. A lot of people got initial support, a lot of people are actually rebuilding, etc. But we still have quite a long ways to go. Only 5% being built, maybe a slightly larger proportion of people maybe receiving the first check to be able to build. And I'm not sure what the continued displacement figure is. I imagine if you don't have a house, you're still basically outside of it. So the facts and figures aren't great. Um, and I think this is one of the reasons that it is important then to look at the other side of the coin. And that's what most people talk about. Whenever people talk about fragility, the flip side of the coin is always resilience, is always coping. So if all of these numbers are super bad, what is the good side then? What is the part of the community that actually is about resilience? And I'll explain a little bit more what resilience means to us. And I brought three recent publications that I'll leave here with you as well. Curiously enough, which you might know, we have a publication that comes out 4 times a year, the Development Advocate for Pakistan, DAP. And the last three that I have been here for, so I arrived in July, August 14th, Independence Day, was one on elections. On Choosing Development was the title of which. And my editorial was about politics and development. So elections, governance, etc. is one. The next one that came out in November was titled Prosperity for Pakistan. And this was an effort to basically collectively provide some messaging and some ideas to the new government that would come after the February 8th election uh, on what some areas of reform at the macroeconomic or socioeconomic areas would be. And I'll tell you what we're thinking, what these 5 pillars are in a minute. And then the most recent one came out last week, titled Resilience. And there's a particular reason for it. It's timed mainly to coincide 1 year after the Geneva Pledging Conference, after the flood. The flood, the big flood happened in August 2022. The post-disaster needs assessment took place. Everybody participated in that. Maybe a month later, the 4RF framework comes out. Recovery, rehabilitation, resilience, and another R, uh, reconstruction. And then all of that goes to Geneva for the pledging conference in January 2023. Here we are 1 year later, and we produced this publication, this edition on resilience, which is really quite important. And the first sentence of my editorial says the following: resilience is the ability to flex but not break. That is the simplest definition of resilience, so that you don't go so much into academic, is this resilience, is it not? Isn't everything resilience, but nothing is resilience? Flex but does not break. I think it is important to just simply ask that question for all of the communities that you engage with, that we engage with. Are these communities that we support in a position to flex but not break? I'm afraid some communities have already broken. Yeah. The fact that 1,700 people died in 2022 floods, or 8,000 people died in a number of disasters overall for the past maybe decade or two in Pakistan, is broken. What else is there to do? Now, the question of resilience is how to build this elasticity, to say the least, in the capacity of people themselves to cope, in the capacity of communities to cope, in the capacities of institutions and services that stretch, because all of a sudden, overnight, You have maybe one or 200,000 people landing in another district requiring services, jobs, etc. And the place they go to is already poor. This is the reality. Most of the folks, most of the people displaced around the world, they don't often go to urban cities. They don't often go to richer places. They go to poorer places. This is one of the things that we have been talking about in terms of the Syria crisis, for example. A lot of the folks that left because of the crisis in Syria went to Lebanon. They didn't go downtown. They didn't go to the major cities. They landed in the poorest places outside of these cities. This has become a standard at this point. So, flex but does not break is more of a question now than it is only a solution. And our ability to build in this resilience for individuals and communities and institutions is really what we want to do. I can't imagine anything else that we together do as a humanitarian agency, as a development agency, as folks working on governance, etc., that isn't related to building resilience in the face of inevitable shocks. This will happen again. If it's not a flood, it's an earthquake. If it's not an earthquake or a flood, it's a drought. It will happen again. This is the age of the Anthropocene. This is the age of climate change. It will happen again. The question is, are we ready or not? Um, maybe one or two other thoughts, and then maybe open up for questions. Um, quite a lot of quite a lot of what we're seeing in terms of multidimensional impacts happening at the same time, multidimensional fragility, multidimensional complex crises, are all happening now at the same time. So think of the last 3 or 4 years globally, but certainly for Pakistan, it's still the same. The four C's: cost of living, COVID, climate change, and conflicts, all happening at the same time. How many countries do you know where almost in the same week or in the same month there's an election, um, an attack on a police station, a strong storm, maybe an earthquake, or something that doesn't even happen in your country? It happens in the neighborhood, but it spills over into your country. There are lots of countries now around the world where this is happening together. So the ability to be resilient against one challenge or one crisis may be okay. But now everything is happening at the same time. It's no surprise that the list of fragile countries is actually going up. It adds maybe 2 or 3 countries every year. Every year, several of those countries already on the list become on the part of the list that is about the most fragile. So this kind of movement between countries, I think, is critical to understand. So multidimensional fragility is happening as we speak, and it's critical to figure out how we deal with all of these things at the same time. The typical solution to this is multidimensional fragility requires a multidimensional response. So we have 3 publications in about 6 months, 2 months each. One focuses on governance, one focuses on climate change, resilience, and one is about development and poverty, generally speaking. And again, I'm not sure what else a development organization like ours would focus on over the next decade, over the next 6 years or 7 years worth of the Sustainable Development Goals. And now the question is, so we have some good solutions. We know all the prescriptions, start bottom up, make sure that these are owned by the community, owned by the institution. Um, and the challenges often become very simple. Scale, for example. Scale of action is really glaring and shocking in a country as big as Pakistan. 250 million population. Just look at the election. 125 million eligible to vote. If 50% vote, that's 70 or 80 million people. That is a lot of people. look at the size of the country, look at the density of the population in particular areas. Scale and scope will always be critical for a country as big as Pakistan, and I think that is critical. That's why um, the kinds of solutions that are required will always have to be about expanding the pie. The pie that is being shared now, with some of its ingredients coming from loans and debt, um, development assistance, small grants, kind of small. Private sector needs more. Finance and investment, I think, is probably the future. There has to be a way to expand this pie so that it meets the growing needs in the country. And expanding it to a great extent with things that further challenge or keep at a standstill the economy is not always the best thing. And that's why I think there's quite a lot of talk these days about development finance and climate finance. It is clear to most people that the future, the near future, perhaps the long-term future, will always be about something related to climate finance. If you talk about energy, energy sufficiency, green energy, blue, etc., all of that stuff, that relates to climate finance. If you talk about investments, um, fintech, agri-tech, all of these things, the investments could also be there as well. They probably, maybe, come from climate finance. That's why uh, the COP processes, COP 26, 27, 28, probably 29 also this year, seem to attract a lot of people, a lot of heads of state, a lot of investors, private sector, developed partners, etc., because that's probably where people are seeing the future. This is a no-brainer, I think, for Pakistan, a country that says we are the least emitters, but we are the most impacted. We are the folks that have the floods and the droughts and the gloughs and many other things, and we require this kind of support. And then I think the second challenge will always be about, okay, so this money maybe comes from outside. Um, how can Pakistan help itself as well? Where is sort of the role of the private sector? Where is the internal growth? Where is the reform? I think that's a major theme in the election manifestos that we've seen at least. And a lot of that reform is around finance, public finance. It is around taxation. It is around particular sectors. It is around the relationship between federal and provincial levels. Um, it's around a lot of the reform. What I've heard so far from most of the senior officials, technical officials, whether here in Islamabad or outside in provinces, is a real political commitment to do so. And now I think there is an expectation that yes, the election will come and the reform to commitment will be there. And also the reform commitment by the new parliament and the new assemblies will also be there as well. Coming back then to prosperity for Pakistan and why us and everybody else, the World Bank, other think tanks have been trying to basically encourage the parliament when they come together to actually think about what their economic reform manifesto will likely look like. And we too have done the same as well. We're working closely with SDPI here on this Prosperity for Pakistan project. Some of it comes out in the publication, but obviously we're tweeting this regularly. Hopefully all of it comes out before the election. We're calling together a national economic recovery plan that ensures one, solvency, revenue, and fiscal sustainability. Um, There are several areas there that I can mention as well: pension reforms, tax reforms, state-owned enterprises, SDG financing, so development and other things. Economic justice and good governance requires a balance of that. We in UNDP are committed to supporting governance at different levels and the capacity to do so, and to build on existing capacity that is in many cases really, really quite good. Some of the stuff that we do in order to support the capacity of our national partners is gap filling, is connectivity, is small marginal support to be able to support colleagues who are already doing a good job, to make it more efficient, effective, and to move from good to great where that's possible. Transition to green economy has become, to a great extent, a no-brainer. And then the last part, obviously, is the deficit, import, export, and the diversified trade regime. And that's kind of a long discussion as well. So for UNDP Pakistan, we very much look forward to the next uh, few years here. I say 4 years generally, not only because this would be, how long I would stay, but we are currently in a 5-year program cycle. The program cycle for us, what we call a country program document, is 5 years long. It is 2023 to 2027. We just finished year one and we have 4 more years to go. And we will work, curiously enough, on climate, on economic issues, on governance issues, and we have a very healthy and strong and ambitious pillar on gender as well. Uh, we intend to do so with partners, national partners in government, national partners in civil society, humanitarian development, and to do so also not only from a programming and implementation way of work, which is popular obviously for folks like us, but the policy agenda I think is quite important too. Um, Here in Islamabad, in the capital, and out in provinces, where much to my surprise and delight as well, there's a particularly keen interest on supporting SDG alignment, SDG monitoring, SDG achievement, with an investment from our national partners into this, our government partners. So for me, I'm very much looking to the next 4 years. It's been an enjoyable 6 months here, and looking forward definitely to a continued partnership with Islamic Relief. We talk almost on a daily or a weekly basis. We have ongoing programming, and I think the future is bright for this particular partnership. I don't know if this is enough of a start. Happy to talk quite a bit more.
It's really insightful that you covered and outlined the great challenges with Pakistan facing at this moment. You started from quite good statistics that how the situation where it is at this moment, and then foresees particularly that how that is global agenda, and then you linked it with Pakistan.
Sir, please
Uh,
mute your volume.
yeah, and particularly in terms of challenges that how that is being addressed in political manifestos of different political parties, and then you emphasize upon climate financing, development financing,
We would
that
like to see more
yeah,
economic manifestos that,
yeah, economic
in
manifestos.
addition to the political manifestos, which I believe exist to a great
Yeah,
extent.
and you concluded it with our partnership that how Islamic Relief and UNDP is jointly taking these aspects forward at community level. So we are looking forward to more discussions. So forum and floor is open for questions, and I would like to request you stay here because that is being live streamed. So your response would be then captured in the camera.
Happy to.
Yeah, I
I
can.
think standing is fine.
Yeah. So yeah. So
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Samuel, for giving us the time, your precious time. Um, as Pakistan is uh, less than 1%, 1% contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions, and we are the worst affected and fifth vulnerable country in the list. Uh, and pledges were made after the 2022 floods received 10 percentage of the pledges, and that is for the uh, emergency and uh, response phase, not for the development or for the recovery or for the preparedness. The current practice in Pakistan is more focused on uh, emergency response. Once an emergency hits, the rehabilitation, the response, rehabilitation, reconstruction begin. What steps, in your opinion, could be taken to shift this focus from response to preparedness? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's easier to take the questions as they come, maybe so I don't have to write. So maybe can I answer this one real quick before I forget? I think it's easier so I don't take notes. Um, so I think there's some good news there with the 2022 flood response, which is probably the following. One is if you look, for example, at the immediate humanitarian response plan, the flood response plan that came out by the UN system, almost everywhere else. The response plan, I think, was the budget was around $860 million, maybe close to $900 million. It eventually was funded over 70%. 70% is well above the average for any humanitarian response plan that is actually published. Um, so there is attention on Pakistan for that particular area. Secondly, there was global attention from the very beginning on Pakistan. So the flood was in August. By September, the end of September, I think maybe the 27th of September, 26th of September, there was a General Assembly resolution in solidarity with Pakistan. And we have just last September, remember that it's 1 year after. The General Assembly requires us to report, Secretary General's report, which UNDP and the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, along with the UN team here, is leading on. And we will report by the 1st of May. And the report on that will be partly or half between the flood response plan and the 4RF. And I think the report will likely be indicating that there's quite a lot of effort that has gone into this. And the process of having a response plan within a month and a GA resolution and a post-development needs assessment and 4RF and a pledging conference all happening within 5 months is much, much quicker and faster and more efficient and has brought everyone to a coherent, coordinated approach to supporting Pakistan very, very quickly. The International Partner Support Group that came out of the Geneva Pledging Conference is still ongoing. 3 meetings, including additional meetings at a technical level as well, and serves to keep the attention on Pakistan where attention is divided. You know what's happened over the last 1.5 years. Earthquake in Syria, earthquake in Morocco, flood in Libya, Gaza, Ukraine continues, Sudan, everything continues. It is difficult to maintain attention. It is important to maintain attention. But the other bit of good news, I think, which then actually answers your question, is that the 4RF is not about now, is not about yesterday, isn't about immediate response. It's actually about the future. And that, I think, is what's most important, which doesn't necessarily happen often. It is always the case that everybody becomes so consumed by a flood response plan that will last 6 months to a year, and then that's it. And then you go back to normal development planning. In this country, there is a humanitarian phase, identifiable, the flood response plan. There is a bridge, which is the 4RF, and that bridge is to going back to normal development processes, albeit now with maybe an additional caseload, more people to support, accelerated development and recovery and reconstruction and rehabilitation. And I think that's quite good. So all of this is good news because the frameworks are there. Um, the challenge now is to be able to finance it, is to be able to build the capacity among different entities that are doing disaster risk reduction, development, climate change, coordination, planning, finance, um, all kinds of different parties to be able to move this forward, not as the humanitarian agenda or the relief agenda or the recovery agenda, but as the normal development agenda. Normal development agenda for me in Pakistan now will always have to be about continuing to build the resilience of the people and the community and the system to withstand future shocks. There are a lot of people around us now that are working on, even in our GLOF work, the Glacial Lake Outburst Floods Program, supported by GCF. Early warning systems are part of the deal. Can we do more? Should we do more? Absolutely. So all of these things I think have to come into play in order for there to be a more preventive approach to some of these inevitable shocks and disasters that will happen, not only to prevent them, but at the very least to mitigate their impact. And at this point, we're only talking about the most vulnerable communities, not everybody else, but just mitigating the impact on the most vulnerable.
First of all, thank you for coming our office in Islamic League Pakistan. I have a question. Pakistan is facing, as you mentioned, the economic challenges, poverty, and resilience. If we will compare with the climate change, uh, over climate financiers are the main contributors at the moment, and Pakistan, more closer to China and as well as so. I Indirectly, those climate financiers are giving us some grants as well. So, in that aspect, how you are looking, uh, I mean, how our country will face those economic challenges and how we will control the climate change related things because uh, communities at the ground are now, poverty is their main challenge. And with the poverty, definitely climate change is linked with them. So these two factors also highlighted in Human Development Report as well in 2022.
Yes.
So I'm expecting UNDP with the support of Islamic Relief Pakistan could do for those communities and and to in terms of economic revitalization, how we can build a strengthen coordination.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you see things in terms of, for any subject, kind of like climate change or anything else, governance, development, there will always be an advocacy angle and a policy angle and a programming angle. Right? Maybe the relationship between all three is sort of the partnership thread. So climate change, the biggest and most vocal voice in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh was probably Pakistan, along with Egypt, from Egypt, so I can say that. But it is interesting that the Loss and Damage Fund was kind of born there. And with the right kind of political will and interest and enthusiasm, 1 year later in COP28, it sees the light with an initial capitalization of 900 million, maybe. The world requires more. But this is the voice of advocacy. This is the voice of Pakistan being the voice of others who may not be as loud or as big or as heavily impacted. And this is, I believe, not only because of a history of maybe being prone to disasters or climate change, but certainly got a particular boost because it was only 2 months before COP that the floods happened. So the voice of advocacy and being very clear on what is the ask. The ask is a fund. How much? It is exactly that. Is important as well. Policy is just as important. Quite a lot, I think, just over the last few months that I've seen, the National Adaptation Plan is out. There's quite a lot of discussion around climate finance, some of it coming from the government, some of it coming from development partners. Almost everyone these days wants to talk about climate finance, which is great, which is important. And I think the investment part is important. Being able to offer quote unquote bankable projects to invest in that are climate friendly, promote resilience, etc., I think definitely is the way to go. And that means very, very specific things for the most poor, the most impacted. It means a flood-resistant home. It means a job or a livelihood that can withstand a flood or a drought. Some of the work that we do with Islamic Relief in Dadu district, the one that we saw together, is about simple canals, a recovery of agricultural sector livelihoods, and the houses, and the meeting area, and the small business for the man or the woman who is just doing simple things, um, and the bathroom. Very, very simple things that makes a big difference. Asif knows this, but I keep saying that, with a little bit more money, we could have helped out a lot more people. It's the problem that I usually call the two-thirds problem. Everything is two-thirds. What about the last one-third? You talked about the pledges for post-Geneva. The pledges were $10 billion, over $10 billion, maybe 10.9. Uh, funds received 6 point something, two-thirds, one-third. The work that we did together with a bit more money, we could have helped out almost everyone in that entire village with homes, resilient homes. Weren't able to do that. Now that I mention this, some of you will start seeing the two-thirds problem in just about everything that you see. It's always 60, 60 or 70%. But for sure, the link between everything that we do in terms of investment, climate finance, particular sector, infrastructure, agriculture, tech, etc., will have some benefit uh, on poverty that I don't believe is indirect anymore. I think it's a direct benefit. What we are doing now, basically to continue to keep attention on Pakistan after the flood, is to think long term along the same lines of how do we build and continue to support the capacity of our partners inside government and outside government at federal and provincial level, to basically have the sustained capacity for resilience, for monitoring, for evaluation, for donor coordination, etc., etc. And that goes well beyond the now 1.5 years after the flood. We have 3 years programming now that we're working on with German support with the World Bank to be able to install that capacity for long term. It's no longer about the past, it's actually about the future. And it's not only about the flood, this effectively is fungible capacity that is suitable for any kind of response. Any of our partners, internal and government or external, civil society or other, having the capacity to be able to monitor, evaluate, validate, um, be financially accountable, ensure that quality is actually okay, is important. Ensure that there is impact. The last 1.5 years worth of flood response were mostly about pledges and money received. The next few months, maybe the next year, will necessarily have to be about impact and results. How people's lives are changed just because you're able to offer them a home or a job or something else, or the resilience of the institution itself, the capacity of the institution itself that offers a service, education, health, social protection, something else, to be able to respond now and in the future.
Yeah. So this is Asif Iqbal. Mr. Rizk, I won't thank you for sharing the shocking data on Pakistani climate, but really appreciate your insight on the subject. I think this is really good for our learning.
You want more? You want more? Good news.
Mr. Rizk, I have the question for you that if we see the outcome of the COP28, what do you see how that outcome fits into the context of Pakistan in medium to longer run? And what opportunities civil society in Pakistan can exploit together with the international donor community?
The outcome, I think, is good. The outcome, to move this one step. The outcome, I think, is good. Could always be better. Capitalizing loss and damage fund, great. But I think the investment opportunities are even more important. We work closely with some of our partners to make sure that, first of all, they are there, but there were a lot of people from Pakistan there. Senior government official, the most senior. Our partners were there. Islamic Relief was there in good measure. Asif, you were there, right? COP28? You were not. Okay. I wasn't there either. So we both missed it. But I think these are the simple things that can lead to big things. Um, Not showing up for me these days at COP28 or for UNDP is not an option. It's important to be there. Uh, Mindful of the carbon footprint of having a lot of people go. The most important folks can go there. UNDP is typically there, and UNDP is there to promote not only issues like the loss and damage work, etc., but also to promote investment, green and blue technology, opportunities for innovation, to link to the SDGs, etc. We found it important, for example, that our partners in Pakistan, when they asked us to support their presence, that federal and provincial level folks would be there, because a lot of the actual impacts of climate change are happening um, in villages, in rural areas, in provinces outside of here as well. So presence, I think, is important. Innovation, I think, is important. Um, Loss and damage, I think, is important. And investment, I think, is really quite important. Showcasing good ideas from Pakistan in a COP setting and maybe other settings as well is critical for investors as well. And the story is really quite simple. There is a role for investors. There needs to be a hospitable, enabling environment here that addresses issues of investor confidence, reform, etc., all of this stuff, so that there's a meeting of interests where everyone here can benefit and where any investor can benefit, whether it's a small investor or a big investor. There are many different legs now to the climate discussion. Investment is one, mitigation is one, adaptation is one, and then there's the leg on risk insurance, which is a process that we've begun just late last year with the Ministry of Climate Change and many other parts of the government and civil society and development partners to figure out how there can be a framework for risk insurance, maybe in particular sectors, that enables, at the very least, investors to think that when they do invest and if something terrible happens, that this will be insured. I mean, imagine these days having a car without insurance. You cannot do that anymore. Imagine sort of life without health insurance these days. Very, very difficult to manage because, like I said earlier, one event can sink you. And this is sort of what's happened. One medical emergency without insurance will be difficult to recover from. One car wreck or accident without insurance can take away your livelihoods if you're a taxi driver, or if you have to take your kids to school, or if you drive a truck, etc., without insurance. So that's the mentality, I think, of the Global Shield work that we're working on now to start this in-country process.
So you have just mentioned that Pakistan has been able to develop national adaptation plan recently, and for the implementation, of course, it's the first time that we have developed adaptation plan, and now implementation would be a challenge. And when we say that adaptation should come from the communities as well, like in other part of world or in other countries, it's a new approach, but it is being followed that community-led approaches should be adopted in while making any adaptation or mitigation or resilience building in communities. So my question is that how civil society and government can work together to make this national adaptation plan more community centered and result oriented.
Sure.
Thank
So I managed to get to visit two or three, maybe more, of our GLOF sites, the Glacial Lake Outburst floods programming, um, in October and November. It was almost getting cold, so almost at the end of the season. So Upper Chitral is very cold in October, November. Um, Gilgit is as well. Uh, Hunza, Skardu, all of these places. And there's a common feature in all of our projects that relate to the Glacial Lake Outburst floods and GLOF. The common feature is that even though we actually do some of the recovery work with clearing obviously debris. So in some cases, a school that we worked to rehabilitate after it was hit by a flood with support from Canada. In one event, water came down, mud came down, and debris came down. So in the schoolyard, the girls' school in Brep, they had big boulders. All of that needed to be cleared. In most of the other places, we had to fix the riverbeds, the canals, did some work on water, although most of the community said do more on water, which we hope we'll be able to do. I learned quite a lot of terminology that I'd never heard before, but I'm new to the climate change work. Ice stupas, never heard about that before. Um Glacial grafting, take a piece of glacier and put it somewhere else and it grows. Mountainside support, because a lot of the flooding actually takes out some of the landslides and the mountainsides. So I get to see all of these things. But the one feature that appeared in all of the projects is that there is a community center. It has a particular name. I can't remember what its name is. Something of the sort. The community-based centers. Yes. Yes. The land is offered by the community. So if you are looking for an opportunity where there's some kind of partnership between a development partner like ours and the local government, I mean, you sort of everybody from local government needs to know what the land is being used for. And the community actually supports the land and the work that takes place to actually build a community-based center comes from the local community. And that to me is a really fascinating example of everyone coming together, including civil society. And I've seen this feature in all of the GLOF projects. So if you think about civil society as community-based organizations, you will see it there. If you think about civil society as NGOs, you will likely see it there. If you think about civil society just as civic engagement and an ownership by the local community for a particular project because they know or they feel that this is important to them. So they invest in it as well, in this case, their land and their time and their energy and their effort. I think you will definitely feel it as well. There's another interesting feature that almost uniformly I saw in all of the sites that we visited, which is a gender feature. Women in at least two or three of those locations um, either already have bank accounts or already have a way of collecting um, using their own finances. Yes, yeah, and figuring out how to invest this collective of money into particular projects that benefit them as individuals in a rotating way. So it kind of looks like the rotating fund, But it is really important that in both of these places, at least two of these places, they came up to me and said, we already have this. It's not that we actually want initial capital. We have capital. How do we develop it? How do we professionalize it? How do you help us scale it up? And how do we support the livelihoods of women already empowered in many different cases uh, that can make them um, resilient, um, financially able, and they support themselves and their families. So these are two features that I saw with a civil society engagement with us and with the local government um, to ensure that this actually works. And I say local government again because um, we don't build, people don't build without the knowledge of some kind of local government. Otherwise, you have no water, you have no electricity. Somebody can come a year later and say, "Where's your permit?" Say this land is not authorized for this particular use, etc. So they collect all of this local political will to actually get it done.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islamic Leaf. This is Syed Safi, Senior Manager Program Development. Well, taking lead from what you said, that the political manifestos are not very much focused on this issue of climate change and the other issues aligned with this. Rather, this issue is kind of absent from their manifestos. And we know that there's going to be a new government in place next month, inshallah. So you have covered so many aspects of this issue and this approach. If I request you to prioritize and help us prioritize top one, two, three policy changes that we need to advocate for with the new government so that we can educate them, we can technically support them. Just top three priorities. What should be those for the policy changes?
So these are the ones that I actually just mentioned. Now they're also on Twitter. But I'll tell you that um, the so you read my bio for comment. And in my previous job, I worked for UNDP's Crisis Bureau, was focused on conflict prevention and peace building and responsive institutions. And on my first month here, I was on television with it's the PTV, the show that's called Diplomatic Enclave, I think, and Diplomatic Enclave, Diplomatic Inside. Uh, and he asked me that question. I mean, so you come from a crisis conflict background. Um, Typically, UNDP would send these folks to Syria, or Afghanistan, maybe Ukraine. I mean, what is it that brings you here, particularly? And what are you bringing to Pakistan if we are not a crisis country, other than the flood and all of that? And I said one of the things that I learned from crisis response or working in crisis context or the crisis bureau is that now it is critical to do development work with the urgency of crisis response. And I say that because it's really hard then to be telling you for an hour that, we're in this multidimensional crisis, multidimensional fragility, but I offer you one entry point. It's not only going to be one entry point. And I think a lot of this will likely happen in parallel. So the question around finance, climate finance, development finance, is critical and timely and urgent and needs to happen in parallel with the reform process that I mentioned here, whether it's about pension or taxation or NFC or any of these other areas. And I think that's really quite important as well. And that's why we have a program in UNDP for the next 4 years where we cannot necessarily prioritize. Can't say I'm going to spend this year on climate change and cover that pillar. Next year we'll do governance, we'll cover that pillar. The year after, maybe we do livelihoods, we cover that pillar, and we still get to the same place at the end of 2027. We're doing it all in parallel. We can all walk and chew gum at the same time, presumably, And I think it is incumbent upon the new government to actually consider all of these things at the same time. We saw political manifestos. Um, we saw over the last 1 or 2 weeks a little bit more on economics in some of the manifestos. And you may be right that, climate doesn't appear as something that, a lot of folks buy into. But I can tell you from everyone that we talk to on the government side, on the civil society side, on the international development partner side, international financial institutions side, this is definitely a critical and urgent area. So I would say both in parallel. I think the climate and development finance part and enabling environment for it, and the reform part, and to a great extent, they're in many ways interlinked as well. Like I said earlier, there is an urgency to grow the pie at this point, and growth is really quite important. Growth economically, balanced, inclusive, that leaves no one behind, is important. Our regional human development report for UNDP Asia Pacific came out late last year, the subject of which is growth, which we hope to launch over the next couple of months. And our new human development report for Pakistan will likely come out in the second quarter with a focus on digitalization. And I think this is one of the key areas that really needs to be considered, not only in terms of apps and drones, but in terms of digitalization as a way for inclusion. This is a way, uh, perhaps a cheaper way, a more effective way to include more and more of Pakistan's most vulnerable into economics, into digital literacy, into access to services, and all of these things happening at the same time.
Sir, I want to ask question about the most fragile region of the Pakistan, that how UNDP is supporting in the policy development of Pakistan,
The most what region?
most
Fragile.
fragile regions, okay, like the newly merged districts and Balochistan. That how UNDP is supporting in the policy development of Pakistan and how to strengthen the institutional capacities specifically for the climate adaptation and for the conflict prevention.
Yes. So quite a bit of our programming over the past few years, and also maybe this year, is actually taking place in KP and Balochistan, emerged areas particularly. We actually have a very big program called the Emerged Areas Governance Program that works on livelihoods and services, that works on border management. And now I think moving ahead, we'll also work a little bit more closely on the impact of climate change, the environment, and resilience in some of these areas as well, because no one is immune now, whether you're in KP, whether you're in the merged areas, whether you're in Balochistan, everyone is impacted. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is now probably going to be a focus for ours in 2024 and moving ahead is a process that we began with government federally and provincially to focus on the 20 poorest districts, the 20 least developed districts in Pakistan as a starting point for addressing issues of poverty. UNDP globally has a strategic plan that is 2022 until the end of 2025. And it has big ambition. We have offices cover 170 countries. And one of these big ambitions that we're calling moonshots is to help 100 million people out of poverty. And if that is the case, then I think Pakistan would be a great opportunity to not only help UNDP globally reach some of these moonshots, so basically bite a big chunk out of this 100 million people out of poverty. But if we only looked at the 20 poorest districts or least developed districts here in Pakistan, per our analysis based on multidimensional poverty, human development, etc., the total population of these districts is about 15 million, maybe 13 to 15 million. And I think that's a starting point. It's not the end point, it's a starting point. So working on the 20 poorest districts here for us is a starting point for us, working closely with the UN system, with our development partners, focusing especially with the provincial government investment in all of this, could be a way that within 1 or 2 years, at the very least, we make a dent in this. And we're going to start working on this very closely. The data is there, the framework is there, supporting provincial governments to do planning for exiting poverty in these 20 districts is also there. Now we have to put the investments in. Some of it will come from us, some from other donor partners, some from other UN system entities, and then clearly an investment from provincial and subnational level partners as well. So there is a starting point. It's not an esoteric sort of philosophical idea that we just want to help people out of poverty. There is a starting point.
Is there any further question? Those who are monitoring this virtual classes. So, is there any question online? No. Thank you, Samuel, for enriching discussion and very which is candid and quite intellectually engaging. So please have a seat.
Thank you.
Now I would like to request Seva Shirali, Deputy Director of Pakistan, the conversation and say what of it. Thank you. Several days for us.
Yeah, I'm also streaming or without that. That's the difficult thing, you know. Huh? Okay, so but that was for him, not for me. Thank you very much, Sam, and welcome to our office, Sam and our colleagues from UNDP, Amir Goraya Saab, Hamza Hassan Saab. So it's really our pleasure, and that's the idea we were discussing among our team that we should start some of the learning sessions, a learning series with some of the experts in the development sector. Though the SAM came in last July, just six months now. One thing is that you can see his lot of intellectual pieces or the knowledge pieces either on the media or on the social media. So I was reading his article of Tribune, which he also mentioned this morning, where he has defined resilience as a not to break, flexibility actually against the shocks and everything. So one thing which the start was basically from the figures. Figures are really worst. But Pakistan has shown a lot of resilience to many things. But of course, with the large climate induced events, climate change events, as well as the poverty, multidimensional things like all the seas are in Pakistan. So the things are difficult. So the conclusion, the solutions or the things is what I found was basically working more closely in partnerships, working in development on an emergency pace, development work with urgency, or maybe a race against time, something in a development. The climate financing, and the third one is reform process, I think. Yeah. So these are the three things which are a lot of things are at a macro level, but a lot of things are also micro level. So the role of civil society, what I found, first thing is that civil society is not only NGO or INGO. The civil society is broader than that. It involves the community, it involves the community-based organizations, it also involves the local entities, it may also involve some local political activity, activists, and all these things. So it's the broader civil society which has a role to play. There are a lot of Pakistan got a lot of attention because of the floods and COP28. Loss and Damage Fund was born in Pakistan, though now it is placed with World Bank now. Is it? No? Yeah. So the challenge is that normally the civil societies they receive or they get are access to those mechanisms. So we are very good. First is to making the These are the things you did not say, but I'm just adding in that. So we are very good in making, we are reactionary. So I remember when I was working in the humanitarian and development sector back in 2004, 2005, some of the UNDP old colleagues, maybe Guraya Saab or Hamza knows them, Zafar Iqbal Saab, he used to go from office to office and he was having his framework and the National Disaster Management Framework. But no one was listening him in 2003, 2004. But when the 2005 earthquake came, then this National Disaster Management Framework came in place. The same thing happened with us, like the climate change. Everyone was talking, even the organizations like Islamic Leaf, they have the big climate change program, green energy, adaptation, all these things. But all these things has become more evident after the flood 2022. So that's the nature of Pakistan. Like the big events, they lead to some policy level things or something bigger. And being the development practitioners or like working in the different humanitarian and development organizations, the funding situation has squeezed a lot. The traditional donors, they are no more there now. The role is with the banks. Banks are the providing more of the assistance. But it doesn't mean that the money is not available. Money is available, funding is available, but the mechanisms have changed. One thing which I would like to request UNDP to consider, because Pakistan had a lot of interesting sustainable development program. Development organizations were working community-based, integrated, area-based development programming. But after the earthquake, majority of the programming shifted towards more a project-based approach. So those type of participation and all these things are not are there, but it's not as it was before. So even the development programs come in a very small projects, like a 8 months project, 10 months project. So the continuity or having more participation is the challenge. Another thing, Sam, is very important. You also mentioned about the different, like ADAPT, the newsletter. Some of the researches, knowledge pieces, learning and development is also very important in Pakistan. Like I'll just give you the example of AJK. I did not see any report in AJK which can tell us is that these are the issues of AJK. A lot of things have changed. So we have seen many researches, but more on very different topics. So the learning and development in this era is very important, in which we need to be. I mean, we'll request UNDP and other development partners to work. Islamic Leaf is not only the humanitarian organization; it's also a development organization. So we are very happy and excited with the partnership which we have with UNDP in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and other countries. And in Pakistan, this flood recovery partnership, I think a lot of credit goes to Amir Goraya Sahab also, because I remember when I joined, I was trying to meet someone in UNDP, and Goraya Sahab was kind enough to give the time. So we were almost on the same page, and our thinking and reflections are almost the same. So now this partnership has entered in a new way. And Sam, once again, thank you, and we will disturb you again somewhere, inshallah ta'ala. So I hope that you will not mind. And thank you for everything. And if you want to say, Amir Saab, you or Guraya Saab, you want to say any last words, it's up to you. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, yes, sure.